This is from NBC Boston. GOP activist and lawyer stabbed to death in his Durham, New Hampshire home. Full stop. We have no idea what happened. It is entirely possible that this guy had a bad poker game and then somebody got mad at him. No idea. He could have been cheating on his wife. And then she comes home and says, and then they fight and then she stabs him. We have no idea. However, not knowing, the issue is typically that whenever we get a news story about a victim who is left with, no, let me stop. I'll put it this way. When Jussie Smollett comes out and claims some guys threw a noose around his neck, the whole world shuts down. Every television network runs a tribute. You get, at the time, Ellen Page saying, like frantically, because some guy hate crime hoaxed all of us. And then when you get a story about a GOP lawyer being stabbed to death, it's like, well, we don't know exactly. So let's move on from this. That's why I think this story matters. Because maybe people on the right, be it post-liberal, libertarian, whatever you want to call yourself, should start saying when these things happen, we make the assumption in the worst until we learn otherwise. Because they went balls to the wall for Jussie Smollett. So how about we say we demand answers as to what happened to this GOP lawyer who got stabbed to death in his own home. The police are claiming was self-defense. I'm sorry. It's going to be difficult for you to convince me, and it's possible, that a person in his own home was killed in self-defense by a different person. It's possible. You invite someone to your house and then you have the intent of hurting them and they defend themselves. It can happen. But still, lawyer in his own house, stabbed to death. I'm not leaning towards self-defense here, but I don't know everything. I don't know.
It's hard because there's no arrest made. We're 12 hours out. There's one article up from a local news station saying they've identified the person involved, but they haven't decided what's going on. I mean, the longer there are no answers in communication, the more suspicious it gets, the easier it is to let sort of the conspiracy theory run wild.
The day after Jussie Smollett, this has been a week. The day after Jussie Smollett. How about the Bubba Rope incident?
Right, the NASCAR thing.
It is national news, headlines everywhere. And now we have this story and everyone's been like, well, hold on there a minute. We don't know for sure. And
which is the reasonable take to have. Like, this is how everyone should respond to stuff like this. Is
exactly
let's find out the facts. No, exactly.
That's why I said in the beginning, for all we know, the guy had a bad poker game.
Yeah.
But I think the issue here is I'm going to lean towards, in the back of my mind, political. Because when it comes to instances of mass tragedies and the perpetrators left wing, they disappear. Whenever the bad guy, whenever the person committing the crime happens to fall into the alignment of the corporate narrative, it's like, can't have that one getting out, and the story vanishes.
Well, it's like Jacksonville versus Nashville.
Just going to say that, yeah, the manifestos, yeah.
That's right. Or how about the guy who rammed the Christmas parade in, where was it?
Waukesha.
And then it was just like, no idea. A truck did it. A truck crashed into these people.
In the literal same city where the Kyle Rittenhouse shootings happened.
No, that was Kenosha.
Kenosha.
Oh, Kenosha.
Nearby,
okay.
though. Nearby.
Okay, so but I think they were triggered by the same.
It was a couple days after, because we were in Austin at the time, and it was after Kyle Rittenhouse had just gotten. I think within 48 hours this happened.
So they were right next to each other.
And he had posted. The guy had some BLM related stuff on his Facebook page, but also he had crashed his car into his child's mother before driving to the parade. I mean, obviously it was a very unstable person.
And then he stopped to try and get a sandwich, remember?
Yes,
somebody?
and he represented himself at trial, which was something to behold.
Did you see that trial?
Oh, I watched a lot of it. I covered it for the site.
The patience that judge had.
I thought that judge should get him. I mean, because part of it was he just kept interrupting. You're saying, when you don't believe in what the courts are ruling, you can kind of defy them. Right. It also turns out that if you don't want to follow the procedures of the court, it is challenging to enforce anything and also ensure the person who's representing themselves gets a fair trial. He had to keep getting sent to another room to watch virtually, and then it's a question of can he accurately represent himself? This is a tangent. This is an aside, but in the case of this lawyer, what's hard is either way, loss of life, very sad. The police in this town are saying there's no threat to the public, so that's sort of playing. I actually think it's leaning towards domestic violence, or they're going to imply it, but it is extremely difficult. I totally get you don't want to jump the gun and blow something up that you're giving the police a chance to accurately investigate. On the other hand, it is hard to say this is a fairly prominent political figure in a state that's the first in the nation to primary. So we kind of need some information here as soon as possible.
And this past week, the GOP was arguing over whether or not to remove Trump from the ballot. So I don't care to give anyone the benefit of the doubt. And my bigger concern is, as a reasonable person, you're right. Domestic probably seems like what this may be. The person who had identified may be a significant other, and that's why they're like, oh my God.
And
like,
they're saying self-defense. Like, who else would be in your home?
Who else would be defending themselves in this guy's
right.
house?
Not a visitor, but someone who actually lives there as well. That being said, if the freedom faction of individuals, whatever you want to call that, the anti-establishment faction, does not get serious in their propaganda game, they lose. And I don't mean to just lie. I mean to make noise, at the very least. Win on the merits of being reasonable. That's why I opened the segment by saying, probably a bad poker game, who knows?
Right.
But be noisy enough about it to force the conversation. Because in the event that there is, and there have been, like Aaron Danielson, for instance, someone shot and killed in the streets of, I think it was Portland, right?
It was, Portland.
By a far left extremist.
Michael Reinhold.
These stories need to get max attention. When Andy Ngo was mercilessly beaten and attacked with the concrete milkshakes in what was that, Portland as well, right?
Yeah.
That forced even Brian Stelter to say, okay, we got to talk about this because it's like going massively viral. There's images everywhere. Attention needs to be brought to it, and those are the victories where you can start to convince these regular people who don't pay attention. There's something going on here, and I'll give a specific example. Oliver Anthony,
Right.
he gets really, really big. He issues these statements after the fact, like, why is Fox News playing my video? Haha, it's about them. He says it's not about politics. It's not, because he does not know what the culture war is. Everything he sings about, and he's a good avatar for this, everything he sings about representing working class people is effectively a right, quote unquote, a culture war right position. But then he doesn't understand because he's not involved deeply in it. So when the media attacks him and calls him conservative, right wing, and the left says these things, he's like, no, it's not left or right. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's just my lived experience.
Well, he didn't even have a Twitter account until August.
And now here he is. And that's my point. These regular people, you go to them, they don't understand the depravity and the evil of the uniparty, neocon, neolibs, all of these warmongers and this garbage. They don't get it. The Jussie Smollett stuff, the woke corporations, they think, well, I'm going to be somewhere in the middle, but they don't pay attention. And then when you actually engage and you say something like, look, I'm not here to argue about policy or anything like that, but it is true that Joe Biden got that prosecutor fired while threatening to withhold $1 billion. As soon as you say that, you're right wing. My favorite thing is when he said you got money for foreign wars, you can't feed the poor. It's like, that's a right wing talking point because the left says sacrifice for Ukraine.
Right.
It's like, you're in the politics, dude. My point is normies don't get it. And if you're loud enough and we bring up more stories like this and we question these things, maybe they might start to see more of the issue.
Go ahead. No, by all means.
Oliver Anthony is kind of the personification of what Pericles said long ago, which is you may not be interested in politics, but politics are interested in you. And we're seeing that. This is a guy who, writes songs, and he did one about his frustration with how things are going. And it was, there was a political element to it, but the guy clearly does not want to be political. And it seems like the rest of his songs aren't political to speak of. And he's been thrust into this political battle he didn't want to be a part of. And, a part of me wants him to just be able to just be a guy who's making songs. Unfortunately, he's being dragged into something he didn't even want to be a part of, which speaks to what you're talking about.
It's because there is a culture war.
Yeah.
You do not, exactly as you mentioned, Pericles, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
You may not be interested in politics. Politics is interested in you. There's nothing you can do about it. We're in a culture war. If it was 20, 30 years ago, you can say, I don't care for Democrats or Republicans, leave me alone. And people might be like, okay, I get it. Today, doesn't matter. The moment he said minors on an island somewhere, far right.
Yep.
That was it. And then they started accusing him of being QAnon. And he's like, I'm not political. That song's about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's the one funding the foreign wars. And at the very least, while there are many Republicans who want war, there are many who don't.
Yep.
So there's a debate happening over there and not one happening over there. It is clearly more about one side than the other.
There's the other thing, too. You were talking about 20 years ago, the culture war. And it's like 20 years ago is about when artists and art programs and all of that kind of thing started saying that you have to be an art activist, and politics started being really infused into art programs, which is when I was in grad school, and that's what it all turned into. Like, I was studying theater, and the next thing I know, it's not about telling a good story, it's not about making something beautiful, it's about infusing your work with political narrative. So that started there, and it's been pushing out this whole way. And now we see, like Oliver Anthony can't get a song out without it being part of the culture war, but like also you kind of need to know where your where you're squatting down. You know what I mean? Like, take a look around.
Yeah.
I gotta completely agree with that. The dude, it's an awesome song. I love Rich Men North of Richmond. Obviously, everybody loves it because it's good. But the dude he personifies in many ways a regular person. And I mean this with no disrespect.
No, like literally. Just
Right.
yeah.
Seeing a lot of these problems we can all kind of identify while being lied to by the corporate press. He did criticize them for it.
Yep.
But my criticism back is, my dude, you must pay attention. You must recognize who your enemies are and who your friends are. And I'm not saying the Republicans are your friends by no stretch of the imagination. Nikki Haley goes up on stage screaming lies about Putin wanting to invade NATO so she can justify her insane warmongering. Yeah, Republicans are mostly bad as well. But you need to recognize who will come after you when you say something like miners on an island somewhere, right? It is going to be the politicians who are on that plane, who are typically aligned with the establishment and their corporate allies.
Well, and this comes down to another way of saying you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you, is you may not be interested in democracy, but democracy is interested in you. When more and more decisions that are being made we aren't allowing individuals to make them, we're democratizing them. What happens is that means that someone has to win, which means everyone else has to lose. And the people that lose have the winner's opinion enforced on them, whatever that thing is. So it becomes less and less about, I disagree with how you live or what your opinion is, you disagree about it, but we're living separately. It's one of us has to win. So now someone that you disagree with is your enemy. And so, of course, the culture war is only going to get worse and worse as things are more centralized and democratized. And the answer, obviously, is the opposite. Decentralization, allowing individuals to make their own decisions.
That was one of the things I liked about Oliver Anthony's Rise, was that it comes from a kind of growing area of music. I mean, it wasn't from, I don't know where music is headquartered in the U.S., I guess Hollywood and Nashville, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's sort of this other alternative form of music that's getting popular right now. I think there is a desire to decentralize our sort of cultural capstones, but it's very difficult because I think that's not what the system, to give it a broad term, wants you to do.
Yeah. Well, I think the art forms that are the most accessible for decentralization are comedy and music, you know? And so I think that that's in part why we're seeing more counterculture people coming out in music and comedy, but we're not seeing that as much in film. You know, it takes an awful lot of money to create an independent film or a series, you know, or a theater performance, or
if you're an actor, if you get that black ball in your file, like, no one's going to want to hire you. That's why I think we were
and
also...
they're on strike now, which I actually think is a boon to culture.
I do too.
I think that's a great thing.
Yes.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.